trafficking. The chairperson of this session is Ms. Razia Ismail. Ms. Razia Ismail is the co-founder and convener of the India Alliance for Child Rights. Previously, she served the World Young Women's Christian Association as the world president from 1991 to 95. She chaired the World Council and International Women's Summit in 1995. She is also the co-founder of Trans-Asia Alliance for Child Rights, 2007. She served the UNICEF for 23 years at the regional and country offices, heading the information, communication, advocacy, and external relations. She is recognized as a child rights advocacy expert and trainer in India, South Asia, and West Asia. We welcome Ms. Razia Ismail as the chairperson of this session. She is being welcomed by Sister Edeline of the Kolkata Marybird Social Center. The speakers for this session are Ms. Dimonj Sharon, Ms. Ananya Bhattacharya, Mr. Manobendro Mondol, Ms. Jean-Françoise, and Ms. Anushika Thompson. May I invite the speakers to kindly come to the dais, our makeshift dais. Acha, Ms. Anushika Thompson's paper is going to be presented by Ms. Anushika Thompson and Mr. Gaurav Kumar Tumar. I think they are co-authors of this paper. I will now hand over to Ms. Razia Ismail to take us through the session.
Good morning, everybody. Since part of our topic is migration, I think it's possible that some of our participants have not yet migrated from having tea to coming up, because in our program it gave the same time for both things. Anyway, let us not lose time for the discussion and learning that we could have together. A lot of us have traveled away from where we began our lives. But has it been unsafe? Possibly not. Possibly it has had its own securities, that movement. A lot of us have moved away and settled away from our origins. But what we're talking about today is unsafe migration. What we're looking at is armed conflict. And there is a distinction that governments made, and including the government of India, between armed conflict as a concept and being at war. But when you are at war within yourselves, that is what we call armed conflict. And when we are at war with someone else, then we have not only acknowledgement of that fact, but also a responsibility to report, to observe the Geneva Conventions if we take prisoners, and there are rules that apply which are internationally recognized. But when we have armed conflict, I think the definitions become a bit fuzzy. And we don't know what scale we should be speaking about. when we refer to any situation by that phrase. Yesterday, I was sitting in another of the sessions, which was about climate change and unsafe movement of people, displacement of people. Sometimes these things merge. Sometimes there is a natural problem and there is a disaster of some kind taking place. And it may be a personal disaster or it may be a mass disaster, but people get unsettled from what they are familiar with, what they are used to, and what perhaps they believe in. So we're looking at armed conflict. Let's be open in the way we consider it. I don't know what the presenters will have in their presentations, but I'm just flagging that. The other thing that we perhaps may or may not look at over here, but I'm suggesting that we do, is at what age in our lives does this happen to us? At what age in our lives do we get caught in armed conflict? When the familiar gets upset, when the things you rely on get moved out of place. So let's keep in mind that the old, the middle age group, the young adults, and children are affected by what we're looking at today. So who are the actors and who are the victims? Who takes advantage of these situations? Even recruiters into conflict take advantage of these situations. So that's what we're also looking at. And these are the two last words that we have here. Displacement is a very wide phrase. I hope we can explore it. And human trafficking, which is across the whole conference. What are the factors that come to bear on this set of topics? And what are we going to hear from different places? We have an interesting panel of speakers. Ms. Dimanche Sharon, International Organization for Migration. Ms. Ananya Bhattacharya, Director of Bangla Natak. Mr. Manavendra Mondal from ATSEC. Ms. Jean-Françoise from Indonesia. And Ms. Anushika Thompson and Mr. Gaurav Kumar Tomar from Chaitanalaya in New Delhi. My own background is not in the area of looking at armed conflict as a subject that I know something about. Unsafe migration, yes, I know a little bit about that. I'm an unsafe migrant myself who became safe. And then you wonder what safety really means after that. So for your moderator also today, this is a learning session. And I hope we can keep our presentations sharp and to the point so that we have maximum time for discussion. That doesn't mean you cut short your presentation. We're looking forward to all of them. But may I then call on Ms. Dimanche Sharon to lead us off. We have you. Why is it so quiet? Come. Okay.
Oh, 10 minutes.
Yesterday after the panel session, we were saying it should be 10 minutes, but we'll give you 12.
12 minutes. Okay.
Will someone say, tell us? They will be touching a card from the back.
No. And I would say also, can you at the back hear and see everything? Because there are seats in front. If you feel like it. You feel your Sunday sleep is still on, then no. No, but this is a working Sunday, okay? No, you start.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sharon Dimanche from IOM. I'm currently based in IOM Bangladesh, but I'm representing IOM Myanmar. Thank you very much, the moderator. Like she just briefly mentioned, I'm not an expert in armed conflict, but I've had the chance to work on migration issues, and hopefully, within the very short time that I have, I'll be able to briefly share my bit of my experiences as far as unsafe migration, armed conflict, displacement, and human trafficking is concerned. Sorry, how do we proceed? Because I wanted to just run quickly through the slide. Before we get into the depth of the discussion, I thought quickly I run you through what migration is, because we have always different perspectives as far as migration is concerned. When you think about migration, I thought I should share with you some of the photos that sometimes I use when I'm looking at migration, because in most cases we have like a different perspective what migration is. And this is migration. I don't know what you think, but to me that's migration. We move, sometimes look for so many, for various reasons. We have to look for maybe food for our family, it's natural. But as we are moving, as we are involved into this migration, there are some risks involved, but we have to move. That's what I call migration. Sometimes we move in groups, sometimes organized, and sometimes disorganized. Sometimes we move and there are dangers. Maybe a truck will come and crash all this, and still we have to move anyway. And sometimes we are organized, again, as we move in groups. But that is migration. And migration has been part of us from time immemorial. Is human history. It leads so many factors. Sometimes we go and get development into migration, civilization is part of us. And when you look at this anatomy of migration, people started from Africa actually. The initial human beings moved from Africa to other parts of the country, of the world rather, and that is migration. Migration is like water. It's irresistible. We cannot stop it. But when we are prepared for migration, then we enjoy it. We get the benefits. Just like rain. Rain comes when we are not prepared, it's disastrous. But at the same time, it's very useful. We still need rain, we still need water, but we have to be prepared for that. Because of time, maybe we can just run quickly. I wanted to show you globally how migration is increasing, how people are moving, but I have a very short time, so I want to run quickly. If you can just go through, please, we proceed. And then coming to the point what we're looking at today, I'm looking at various types of migration. Go on. And we have regular, irregular migration. Please move on. And today, I was thinking we should focus mainly on irregular migration, looking at that is what I thought we should look at today as far as unsafe migration is concerned. Irregular migration, look at smuggling of migrants, look at human trafficking, and this caused by forced displacement, armed conflict, man-made natural disasters. And within that, we have various groups of categories of people, IDPs, refugees, all of them who are at risk and who are always vulnerable groups who are involved into this migration. So while I was looking at migration and looking at what are the risks associated, forced displacement, in IOM carried out recently a study, and there was a poll trying to find out whether actually migration, looking at trafficking, migration in crisis, is it really very necessary? Is it very important? Shall we focus on migration, on trafficking during crisis? And there were so many people who responded, about 76% did not have an understanding of what trafficking, unsafe migration is during crisis. And then there were questions whether we should actually focus on trafficking during migration, rather during crisis, and about there was a biggest number who actually said, yes, we should focus, and about, I think, 60, 75% suggest that we should focus on migration. Ideally, there was a misunderstanding. People did not understand what we always do as far as trafficking response during crisis setting. And this is what I thought I should quickly share with you, the findings of that study. In 2015, when there was, during the Global Summit on Ending Sexual Exploitation, Violence in Conflict Setting, the IM Director General mentioned and said, human trafficking sometimes flourish in emergencies because of increased vulnerability of affected populations. There is always a breakdown of the traditional support structures and always weakened state infrastructures and social service support systems. Unfortunately, during this crisis, in most cases, we tend to focus on humanitarian responses and we forget about other vulnerable groups. And this is what I thought we should look at today. What shall we do? And what can we do as the different actors looking at migration during crisis, during conflicts? Do we really need to focus on migration or on providing support even to victim of trafficking, other vulnerable migrants, an area that is always, in most cases, forgotten? I quickly wanted to highlight looking at trafficking in the context of armed conflict, and I looked at Libya and Iraq. In most cases, these are some of the issues that happen during crisis. There is, of course, instability. There is lack of rule of law, and in most cases, a lot of impunity going on because of the breakdown of the existing structures within the systems. The traffickers quickly take advantage of that situation. The perpetrators, who are sometimes armed groups, they don't fear anything because they are in control of the areas. That is what happened in Libya. And as we go on into our discussions, I'll share briefly what happens, for instance, in Myanmar, in Kachin, northern Shan state, what is going on as far as armed conflict is concerned. You find that in most cases, there's a lot of impunity for even the armed groups, what they are doing as far as the trafficking is concerned. But all this, people tend to focus on humanitarian response, providing food, providing like on non-food items, and forget the very key aspects of the vulnerable migrants. There are gender dimensions happening. In most cases, during this armed conflict, the armed group tend to actually take advantage of the women, of course, for sexual pleasures, exploitation, and others recruiting them as, you know, in their workforce to cook for the fighters, and so many other reasons that come in as far as exploitation and abuse is concerned during armed conflict. And of course, sometimes families tend to adopt negative coping mechanisms during all these conflicts because they don't have any other sources of livelihood, and they tend to survive through thinking that they can actually give out their children, young girls, getting married to this person who is in power to be able to survive. So there's some of the negative coping mechanisms that are happening during crisis, and which unfortunately we tend to ignore, and yet we are key stakeholders working during all these conflicts. Well, natural disasters, some of these, my focus today, I was told I should focus mainly on armed conflict, but I thought it's also important to bring in the aspect of natural disasters. Whereas some factors, some of the vulnerabilities, some of the risk factors actually which happen in armed conflict as well as natural disasters are more or less the same, but there's a tendency of at least some unique factors happening, risky behaviors happening, even natural disasters. In armed conflict, we find that there is, of course, a breakdown of the structures, rule of law, impunity happening. But in the natural disasters, in most cases, this happens in the aftermath of the natural disasters happening, where even there's the children, the women are most affected because they have to fend for their families. They are in the camps, in most of the IDP camps that are breeding grounds for all these the traffickers and the smugglers coming and taking advantage of them. I won't get into details on this, but we have examples in the Philippines what happened, and in Haiti, these were some of the key factors that came up during disasters where we need to focus on and provide support to these affected populations. I have already gone through all this. In the interest of time, initially I thought I should break down all those different risk factors, but in the interest of time, I think I'll just skip that. But again, just to highlight the fact that during crisis, it's actually very challenging. Everyone is running around. Everyone, unfortunately, everyone thinks that human trafficking is a development issue. It's not a humanitarian issue, whereas and sadly it is, and something that we always forget. And this happens to everyone. I've had a chance to work in camps, all those IDP camps, where very young children, I was working in the Horn of Africa and looking at many migrants coming from Eritrea who end up in Ethiopia, of what happens in Eritrea. But sadly, find very young children, as young as 5, on their own, unaccompanied children. And yet, we think we are only responding to humanitarian needs during conflict and forget about these issues of unsafe migration, about the issues of trafficking. We think we are responding, but in the long run, the consequences are very immense, which it is unfortunately very challenging to be able to respond and provide support after that. So I would really think we should focus onto this, go down and think seriously and say, what should we do? What is my role? What is each one of us's role when we are working during these emergencies? What can we do to provide support to these vulnerable groups? Again, I also had a chance to work during disaster emergencies. We had a group of people that were coming. We are planning for them. You're providing cash grants. You're providing non-food items. And this huge group of migrants got into a bus. Sadly, there were perpetrators in there. And instead of taking the migrants to their home location where they're supposed to go, there were plans to take them to a different border. And then they ended up using the northern route. Sorry, I'm using some examples of the recent examples in Africa, mainly. And we were alerted by some of the security agents that we were closely working with and told, look, the bus you just boarded is taking a different direction. And they used the little money that we gave them for onward transportation to plan for their next move. And this because of the influence of the traffickers that were within the group that we did not pay attention to, unfortunately. And all these things are happening. And what happens, well, the question would be, why is human trafficking overlooked? There are so many reasons. And this, in most cases, is because of lack of clear definition, clear boundaries as far as human trafficking is concerned, and other aspects like just labor exploitation, gender-based violence. There's very a gray area as far as definitions are concerned. But in most cases, there's limited law enforcement, but even lack of those legal framework happening as far as trafficking is concerned. But of course, during conflict, one would say it makes a lot of sense in terms of implementation, enforceability of those laws, because it's a crisis. But we shouldn't use that as an excuse and something that we should pay attention to. I will quickly look at what I think we should do as far as responding to trafficking and other vulnerable migrants is concerned. Let's move on. And one aspect I was thinking of is data. There's a dearth of data information during emergencies. I've seen during displacement, during conflict, people are always mainly focusing on carrying out baseline assessments of displaced population. Whereas you're doing that, there's a tendency not to include issues of trafficking, issues of irregular migration. They are always excluded. And that's a very big challenge. And when it comes to responding, donors or other international partners or actors or even the communities ask, where is the information? Where are the numbers of these victims of trafficking of irregular migration? And unfortunately, we do not have such kind of information, and then they are not able to provide funding for that. All this, I think, because everyone is busy trying to run around and provide the so-called life-saving support, and yet even trafficking, even smuggling of those migrants is actually a life-saving initiative, because if this migrant is sexually abused, they get diseases, then at the end of it all, they lose their lives. So what are we doing? So I thought we should look at, in terms of response, we have to have a comprehensive approach. And we should start now. As we are working with our government partners, the civil society organization, the international community, we should look at the 3 phases: before the disaster or armed conflict or anything happens, and during, plus after. The after, there are always key aspects we should look at, but I won't get into details because of time. But we can look at research. Can we collect more information so that our response can be informed? We don't just have a one-size-fitting-all approach, but we have mainly tailored response. Then we look at, during the emergency, we should respond, we should work together with all the different actors. And then we look at all aspects: the protection, the prevention, prosecution, and partnership. That is very key as far as response is concerned. These are some of the recommendations I was thinking we should have for the state, and as well as for the other international actors, but I won't get into details. But mainly, we look at capacity building initiatives, we look at cooperation, which is very important with all the different stakeholders, and we look at awareness raising. I quickly wanted to show you some of the capacity building initiatives we've carried out, and this is what we have done in close coordination with the government, with the civil society organizations, looking at protection, mainly in IDP camps, with other implementing partners. Let's run through quickly, it's just pictures. And here we brought together the different stakeholders, the religious leaders, the CSOs, and governments sat together on capacity building session to understand what human trafficking is and how they can respond during emergencies. Again, the same initiative. So they're just photos to show you the actual practical things we're trying to do to make sure that everybody comes on board to understand the need to respond on human trafficking. Yeah, so that is briefly what I have, and unfortunately I couldn't get into details, but please feel free to ask any questions, and this we can be able to share with you, or even maybe after this. And in case you want, I can also share with you the details, but perhaps during these discussions, maybe to ask, or I can respond to some of your questions. Thank you very much. Don't take much of your time, I'm sorry.
Thank you very, very much, Dimash. By the way, do you know that the meaning of her name is Sunday? Yeah. Thank you very, very much. She turned it into a working Sunday. It is important to get the picture, the setting, and I believe Dimash has done that very well in giving us the setting, and did not talk about us at home. We went pretty worldwide in listening to what she was saying and looking at what she was saying. I do hope that we will get transcripts eventually of what is being said in all these sessions, because it's invaluable for our own next step. Whatever is being said in these sessions is really for sharing. And I think that we're getting our live lesson books from people who have actually looked at the situations. So we got a picture of unsafe migration. And it actually didn't matter whether you're coming from a rich and propertied home or you're coming from a pavement home. You get affected. Your ability to deal with it may vary depending on what your other resources might be. But one of the things that came implicit in what we were hearing was the whole importance of vulnerability assessment. When something like this happens, what do we know? What do the authorities know of who is most vulnerable? And sometimes it's the poorest and the least served who are most vulnerable. Sometimes they're also the most resourceful of making do with very little. But vulnerability mapping, and I think that your emphasis, Dimash, on the before is very important. And the way in which we can deal with the during and the after really depends a lot on what we know of the situation and the condition of people as it exists when something goes wrong. We have it in our recent disaster management experience also, and we have it in areas which have got conflict problems. Floods and earthquakes and things of that nature, landslides, they don't worry about whether you are fighting with each other or not, but they create competitive situations. So thank you very much. Let's be mindful of what she said. We move now to the next speaker. Dimash was asking, are there questions? Well, if there are questions, make a note of them, but let's not have them now because then we will stay with the first presentation. I would suggest that we hear the presentations, and she was sharp in her management of time. Can we all try to do that? And extrapolate from what we're hearing and saying, and then have discussion. So if we have time limits on ourselves in presenting, including the moderator, we'll have more time for discussion, and I hope we have good discussion. And thank you to those who came later on for filling up the seats. That looks much better. Okay, our second speaker is getting lost. Oh, nice of you to tell me. I just found it. Ananya Bhattacharya, can we hear from you?
A very good morning to all of you, and I'll start by thanking Kolkata Mary Ward Social Center for putting up this excellent conference. It's very important, and thanking them also for inviting me to share our experience. Banglanatak.com, we work across India, and our mandate is pro-poor development and sustainable development using culture-based approach. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes, I'm going to share some of the challenges we face, because this is primarily a panel discussion. So really we have to learn from you, and we'd like to know from you your thoughts on the challenges we face on ground. In the past few years, we have been working primarily in West Bengal, Jharkhand, and Bihar, and in the border areas of Nepal and Bangladesh on addressing human trafficking, on addressing prevention of human trafficking. And we have been also trying to find out a little bit on how conflict is being resolved using, as I said, using culture and other approaches in South Asian countries, little bit in Sri Lanka, little bit in Nepal, and things like that. So based on that, I'm not going to go details on that, but some of the challenges we faced and some of the good practices we found. Next, please. Now, of course, migration, as Sharon wonderfully presented, it's natural, it's happening. Our traffickers, they have kind of proven that they're smarter than us who want to prevent trafficking. And as per the latest report, there are more than 500 trafficking flows across the world. Women and children are the main victims, and it's happening not only for commercial sexual exploitation, but also for exploitative labor, an area which is largely ignored. So when we are talking of displacement, when we are talking of migration, this issue of labor needs to come into focus. Next, please. Now, we did recently a study in what is happening for prevention of cross-border trafficking, for prevention of unsafe migration in India, in Nepal, in Bangladesh. And broadly, what we found that we are all working in different prongs of action. So these are some of the prevention strategies. Lot of good work is being done on ground, ranging from awareness to developing agency, reducing vulnerability of at-risk communities, giving livelihood and education and other support to at-risk communities, capacity building, trying to build networks and coalitions and a little bit of research, data, information, though that is the weakest prong, as also Sharon shared. So while all these are happening, just let's go to the next slide. I'm not going to talk of the problems. We all know the problems. So mainly the challenges I'd like to highlight. First thing, I think as a forum, we need to break the silence on human trafficking. We are a community who are somehow restricted within the walls of conferences and out in the field. But if we walk down the road and ask 10 people on what is human trafficking, most people don't know. So we need to break the silence on human trafficking in general. I think that is the biggest challenge. And that is where this before part, which Sharon wonderfully pointed out, is completely lacking in many cases. And the silos. Now, we were finding cases of organ trafficking, cases of surrogacy. A girl was rescued 2 years back from Delhi. She had been trafficked at the age of 12 and she had delivered 8 surrogate babies. Now, this poor girl never knew what is surrogacy, never knew the exploitation she may have faced. So people are completely unaware. In Nepal, as many of you know about the case of Karve, 100 villagers in one single village that lost one kidney and then didn't know about it. So this whole issue of these changing forms of trafficking, people don't know. Not only the people who are vulnerable, but even the sectors who are working on it. The organ transplantation, does anyone in the health sector even talk about human trafficking? They don't. Talk of, this whole sector of adoption. Only recently, a lot of good work has started happening, thankfully. But still, at large, people don't know how adoption rackets are being used. And last year, when babies were found in biscuit boxes in Calcutta, that was a shocker. So we somehow are not working across departments. We are working in silos and we are not connecting with each other. So in this forum, maybe we need to discuss how we can, move to these other areas where traffickers are going in and trafficking is happening. Now, research is a huge challenge. Research is a huge challenge when we're trying to map. We found that there's little information on how cybercrime are leading to trafficking, on begging rackets, on organ transplantation. There's no research. Domestic violence, last whole month we were in Pathar Pratima, which is one of the remotest area of Sundarban. We reached out to 200 schools of that Sundarban area. And we found children, we use theater. We use theater so that people open up, so that people speak. And these children, they said how their brothers, how their fathers were raping them, how mobiles were being hidden behind showers, and those mobile videos were being distributed by their own families. Just God knows for what. So we don't have the research. So these are other things we are hearing, these anecdotes, and we don't have any collation on that. I think that is one of the biggest challenge where we need to work together. Safe migration, when we were reviewing the work, we found we tell people stop trafficking, beware of trafficking, but people don't know what to do. Right from the persons who are going. We found in Nepal, there are cases of mail order bride, and it has also happened in Northeast, that from Korea and China through email, marriages are getting fixed. And when they're going, they're thinking they will have a good life, and they are becoming slave wives, and often they are forced, into sexual exploitation. And so we kind of, these are some of the examples of posters where we tried to pinpoint like what to do. I think that is an important area of communication which is missing. Now, when we are working to address vulnerability, we are working a lot with vulnerable communities. But what about the demand side? Again, there is very little work there. And we need to talk to the business, to the corporate. Somehow they are completely unaware or unconscious of ensuring about, the employment, about having decent employment practices, ensuring their supply chains are trafficking free. We find that people are going, young boys are going and working for when this mobile thing was, most of the trafficking which was happening when our mobile networks were being built, they were all going to build the towers. That was a standard area of labor exploitation. And I'm sure none of the mobile companies ever thought of it. Recently, we found out that now everywhere mobile has penetrated, and in Sundarban, the people who are giving the prepaid SIM cards, they are also passing on the phone numbers and the contacts of the girls to traffickers. See, so these people, these agents who are somewhere in the middle, they are perhaps unaware of what they're doing. So we need to work with them so that they clean up their act. We have so many placement agencies, and last year, a lot of placement agencies who have trafficked hundreds, and like in Jharkhand, there was a placement agency who ran 200 agencies, one single couple, and they trafficked so many from Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, all in the name of employment. But these areas, our work is really not touching. Next. Again, what is my role? As Sharon said, somehow I was finding reflection because we are working in the same field. So I think we are facing the same challenges. So people do not know that what they need to do. They do not know where to report. They do not know where to seek. So last year when we were working in the border with the border security forces, when we were working with the police women, we had to actually tell them what to do because they didn't know. And the good things which happened, like SSB, they worked in the whole of Nepal border and they went out to the schools because we need to build a public friendly image of our security agencies. Perhaps because of our long years of, though, we are now independent for 70 years, but still police is still not our friend. We need to change that, and that good work has been happening in Nepal. Good work is happening in Sundarban now, where every school the police women are going and telling them and giving numbers, and there is immediate result. As I was sharing last month, there were 4 rescues because the girls simply called up. We don't have that last line of help, where to report, they don't know. So these are the areas where we need to come together, and we need to do it very fast. Next. Another challenge we face, we have a lot of organizations, all of us have a lot of grassroots partners. We have child protection committees in Bangladesh, Nepal, there are vigilance committees. So everywhere there are these structures on paper, they're there. But these people do not know what they have to do. These people are not trained. And this is an enormous task. And as I said, that if you walk down to a village and ask, what is a child protection committee? No one knows. So we have this massive mandate of capacity building. If we have to, and this, I'm talking across the sectors, be it disaster in Nepal, when the earthquake happened, we were there actually, the previous day we were there. And at that point, unless we do that previous part, it's impossible to handle at that point in that phase of enormous crisis. Similarly, when there are a lot of organizations working with young people to develop youth agency, but unfortunately, it's all in a project mode. Same problem is with networks. It's all in a project mode, and once projects are over, things get over. We need to work beyond that. And one thought I'd like to leave for discussion is we have business councils, we have art councils. Why can't we form a council of organizations who are working on anti-human trafficking, whose mandate will be developing these grassroots skills and capacities, whose mandate will be to do the advocacy, to do the research? Why don't we have partnerships with academics and universities to build this evidence, to build this data of before? Because all these children, they have to do projects, and instead of doing, typical 1-month work at NGOs, they can add to this valuable pool of knowledge. But unless we come together, unless we think together, we can't really do it. And evidence-based advocacy had a lot of good result. We have seen in India only recently, from the Domestic Worker Placement Act in Delhi to the missing children case, where public litigation showing data, we have been able as a community to bring in changes. So we really need to have some kind of council to take forward the effort. I have just given this photo of a bus which traveled, we covered more than 500 remote villages in this year. And this bus, which has this, we just get these newspaper clippings. We didn't even think at that point of these missing children and missing news and where to seek support. And that boy's photo someone saw and reported to police, and that boy was rescued, the boy whose photo is in the bus. So you see, the whole issue is we are not reaching out to the people. We do not have the information. And this is a huge challenge which we need to work together. And I'd like to have some discussion today on this. Next, please. Now, migration. Migration is a huge challenge, and we have, in our work, we have faced armed conflict situation in Jharkhand when it was a palayan where young boys, they used to flee, otherwise At one point, the Naxalites used to force them. We have now the whole situation of Rohingyas staring at our face, and somewhere we have our priority missing. Somewhere we are saying as a country that terrorists might come in and extremists might come in, and so all these women and children, we are ready to put them in extremely vulnerable situation. So we don't have migration policies. What if we have good laws for migration for work? I think if we make this regular migration possibility stronger, then all this problem of illegal labor, exploitative labor, these will be addressed. Some good things are happening, like in Pathar Pratima, we saw the seasonal hostels for migrants are there. So at least the older children are there. But still people are unaware. We were working in UP, we are working in Orissa, and people, when they're migrating, they do not know that they can get the basic health facility in any Anganwadi center. They do not know they can put their children to school, and as per RTI, they have right to education in their language. So it's all kind of very closely integrated. Next, please. So as I was saying, Bangla Natak works using culture. So we thought that, how culture can also work. And why this trafficking is happening? It is happening due to poverty. It is happening for aspiration of better life. Now, why are people migrating? Why are people displaced? Say, how many of you here are from Calcutta? Just please raise your hands. And you love any one of you who do not love Calcutta, please raise hands. No, because this city makes you feel belong, right? So we love Calcutta. We don't want to go out of Calcutta. But somewhere that sense of belongingness is not happening. When we're going to the villages, we find these young people, they don't know what to do with their life. They don't have any role model. So they think that, that world they see in television or film, maybe that is out somewhere. And most of the trafficking is happening for promise of job or love, knowingly falling into the trap. So for that, what we have started doing, and not only we as I said, we tried to find out examples across South Asia. So in Sri Lanka, as you know, there is this Tamil and Sri Lankan conflict. And what the organizations are doing, they're doing bilingual drama, where they do in Tamil and Sinhalese, and first time they're talking to each other. In Tripura, the government has a wonderful initiative where, there was a lot of ethnicity conflict there. So they, in each village, they do culture festivals where, people learn about each other culture. So somewhere we need to work on building cultural understanding. From Bangla Natak experience of Art for Life, we have covered more than 30,000 families out of poverty. And in these villages, there has not been any migration. And this includes not only West Bengal, but also in Bihar, in Madhubani. When we started work, all the young boys had to out-migrate. There's no job. But with the flourishing of this local skills and local crafts business, what happened? The identity changed. They found interest. They got engaged in their community, and they started taking ownership of the developmental goals. They started installing the toilet. They started sending their children to school. So this is a way to build resilience through culture, to improve cultural understanding and address conflict. So sometimes, we need to think beyond of just addressing the problem, but creating an ecosystem. So with that, I think I'll end, because these are the questions I really wanted to share with you. And to summarize, we need to get together. We need to have a structure which will have the mandate to do capacity building, to share information. For example, there was an example I think shared yesterday that we know people are going to Kerala for work in construction, but in Kerala they are finding they're getting forced into exploitative labor in agriculture. And one of labor officers once shared that there was a group of girls who were brought to West Bengal for fishing, and they managed to go to the labor office to seek help. But she said, I have no clue that there are people coming from Kerala to West Bengal fisheries. So we need to have this data and information sharing environment to strengthen access to services and for responsive action. So this is where we need to work together. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Ananya, for bringing the problem home as well. Constructive engagement. Constructive engagement needs for us to know And I think that these insights as to how we can become not change agents, but also some sort of supporters of restoration of hope and purpose is also part and parcel of this. A lot of the people who get unsettled due to some kind of conflict or tension in their own home areas really don't know whether they can come back. So sometimes when you say that there's an upset or there's a disturbance or there is something and you are temporarily removed, one doesn't know whether it actually turns out to be temporary. Sometimes you lose confidence in being able to come back. Sometimes you feel that you are targeted because of something else, not the events that have happened, but who you are. We have evidence in the last few years in our own country of people who were living their own lives and didn't think they were disturbing anybody else. And in their case, it was a human disaster. It was not anything to do with the forces of nature so much as it was a human disaster. Their occupations have gone, their homes have sometimes either been occupied or destroyed. So then, how do you come back? And I think that the coping mechanisms and also the restoration of your own confidence in being able to go on with your life. And that confidence means reassuring not only your children, but your elders and yourself. Sometimes that basis for reassurance is very shaky. And then where do you end up? So if we pick up on what Ananya said very, very eloquently on how do we equip ourselves as well-meaning people working with other people, with communities, seeking to be helpful and constructive, how do we understand what is going on internally in the life prospects and the stability prospects of people who get unsettled? And sometimes it doesn't really matter whether you're on this side or that side of attention. You're caught in the middle. It's not necessary that you can recover from that, because if you're caught in the middle, and it is something like what we have from areas like Dantewada in our own country, where people who were tribal communities caught in the middle of a struggle which is really about other things. And I think that their lives and their pattern of their lives is permanently affected. So where do we stand on that? And I think that the advocacy has to be about the internal person as well as the external damage. The internal person has a very hard time restoring his or her own confidence and even self-image. So let us think of the many examples that we have in our own country, but also learn from what is happening in other countries. And I think that, somehow nobody has mentioned Syria yet, but I think we should think of Syria. How much do we read and hear and see on TV about what's happening with the Syrian population, which has seen its country and its homeland becoming a battleground for other things, not for themselves? And how do they come back? So the coming back part is part of restoration, the physical coming back, and the physical coming back is sometimes very difficult. Sometimes it's impossible. So let's just keep it in mind. Next we have Mr. Manabendra Mandal from ADSEC, South Asia. The next 12 minutes are yours.
Thank you. I heard a proper presentation, but I felt that it is better I just speak on the issue. I am happy that the Loreto Merriward Social Work Center has organized this program, has invited me. So thanks to them. This is very important workshop that is taking place. I remember hundreds of years back, Calcutta used to send migrated people from different parts of this country who used to be brought to Calcutta, and Calcutta's Babughat was the center from where the bonded and forced labor used to be sent to Africa and other countries, West Indies and other countries, as a forced labor to work in plantation and other works. Almost 20 years back, B.S. Naipaul, the noted writer, his mother came to Calcutta to give a puja, offer a puja in the mid-Ganges. She hired a boat, went to the mid-Ganges with the priest, and offered new clothing, money, and other things to Mother Ganga there. So this is one of the places in India from where thousands and millions of migrated people for forced labor were sent to different countries. Anyway, things have changed over this century. Now, migration is a human right of the individual, but what you call the unsafe migration leads to trafficking. And before I start, I would like to talk a minute on ATSEC. ATSEC is a networking, rather a coalition of organizations working on the issue of trafficking in 5 countries of South Asia directly. And we have linkages. Those 5 countries are Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and India, Bhutan. Now, we have linkages with 2 more countries, Afghanistan and Maldives. And we have the largest number of members, so far as NGOs and other bodies are concerned, in a single country working on the issue of trafficking. ATSEC has developed the Government of India paper on child sexual exploitation for this country to be presented at the Rio conference. We have also done studies of homes in India in 19 states. And we have submitted it to the government of India. There are many things which could be told about ATSEC, but this is not the proper place to speak all the details on that. That will take time. As you know, trafficking is an organized crime which violates all tenets of human dignity and rights. Trafficking can occur for various purposes: labor, commercial, sexual exploitation, organ trade, and so on. Trafficking is a center and state subject in India. Poverty, illiteracy, lack of livelihood options, man-made disasters makes a person vulnerable to trafficking. India faces both in-country and cross-border trafficking. Now, estimate place numbers of sex workers in this country to 3 million or more, of which 40% are children. Now, 90% or more estimated is in country, and 5 to 10% of cross-border trafficking reported mainly from Bangladesh and Nepal. Also, there are reports that people from India are being trafficked to Middle East countries for domestic help, manual labor, child marriages, construction workers. If you look at each of the states in India, they have a different kind of trafficking. being sent to abroad, like the Saudis and others coming to Hyderabad, marrying young girls of 13, 14, 15, a 60-year-old person or 50-year-old person, marrying those kind of girls and taking them to Saudi, using them for a few years and sending them back to the parents, paying the parents a huge sum of money. And at the same time, Andhra Pradesh is the only state which had a law made on adoption and trafficking to stop, adoptive children from there. And also that is the state which provided the first state-level policy on trafficking issue. Now, I'll come to, we all know the definition of human trafficking. I'm not going into that. But I'd like to talk about a little bit about what makes a person vulnerable for trafficking, especially from our country. I think it is more or less the victims of violence, and mainly domestic violence, sexual harassment at workplace, or even at home. I think when someone is sexually violated in the home or elsewhere, what we call the first-time break-in for a girl, she gets traumatized, which she carries throughout her life. And it comes back to her mind, and she remains emotionally disturbed for the rest of her life. How could we rehabilitate her? What ways and facilities available to make a population of several lakhs having trauma to redress their mental condition? Any redressal facilities are available here? And for how many children or women we could provide that? I am a member of the internal, what you call ICC, of the government in 2 districts, and also in one of the National Institute. When I took over, we found that about 30 complaints are there waiting for 3 years just, and no committee meeting was held. When I took over, the 3 professors had to be suspended, and 2 cases are going on in the high courts of Calcutta after our intervention. More things could be told, but what we found that when the children see their mothers beaten at home, when children living in an atmosphere which is not child-friendly, where is extreme poverty in the home, they don't get 2 meals a day, and above all, there are forced migration, which makes people mainly vulnerable. We have seen number of cases of kidnapping and abduction, after which they have been taken away and sold to be taken as a migrant labor. We have a law on interstate migration, never to be implemented. Hardly any state is there who have made their state rules for interstate migration. 90% of the migration takes place internally, within the country. And hardly 10 to 15% differing in different years, is they are the sufferers of, victims are sufferers of cross-border trafficking. Now, even for religious purposes, trafficking takes place. In Kenya, I have seen that sexual mutilation of women for religious purposes, I mean, they are taken, now there is a law banning that. They are taking them to Somalia for that purpose, genital mutilation. UN is working on that heavily. Now, people are allured for good job or services abroad. That's why immigration laws comes in. We have a protectorate of immigration, Director General in the Protectorate of Immigration, but we have a law whereby you can register a placement agency, but you cannot cancel their registration. Hardly 10 years back, we had to suggest that we must change the law and amend it so that these registrations could be cancelled. And also, we have found one group, a Malaysian agency working in Chennai. They are taking money and sending people abroad for services. People sell their houses, sell their lands, and went abroad for earning good sums of money so that they become rich persons when they come back. Nothing happened. They were working as even an engineer, a master's degree holder. They are working as a manual labor in Malaysia and elsewhere. Even Sudan, few years back, India government had to bring back about 60%. They were taken from here after a large sum of money were taken from them, but they were put into what you call forced labor situation pay, and even accommodation was not proper. So Indian government, the embassy there had to bring them back at the cost of the government. What do we do about these things? We have laws never to be implemented. We have very, very good law, whether it is juvenile justice or POCSO for the children. But how far we have been able to implement it properly, and what are the gaps and how could we fill up these gaps? So these things need to be taken care of. Now, even some people or some young adults or even children, they aspire for becoming a movie actor or a model. They run after these agencies. Tell me the time. I'll take 3-4 minutes more, 2 minutes more. One, okay. And they are lured, they go there and falls into the trap of the traffickers. So they say movie and feel for becoming the hero or heroine there. Now this is the situation. But what I finish with in 1 minute, what Raji has suggested, is that we have 3 P's and 5 R's. That is prevention, which is very much lacking in this country. We have very good plans, but for prevention, there is very little allotment of finance or the budget. And also then protection. Now government is taking little interest in the protection, and they have formed DCPO's unit, District Child Protection Officers unit, in all the districts. And that is equipped with number of people, experienced people. Then the prosecution. Prosecution will have to develop quite a lot. We'll have to train these prosecutors and young lawyers to take interest in such cases, because these cases don't give much money, and lawyers like me are less interested in taking up these cases. And 5 R's are rescue and rehabilitation, repatriation, restoration, and reintegration. So each of these areas, we need expertise people, we need trained people. We have seen counselors just after getting her or his degree, gets a 6 weeks or 5 weeks training and becomes a counselor. We need trained counselors who are equipped with knowledge and practice. Otherwise, these traumatic victims cannot be restored back, and society has got to be prepared to accept these victims back home so that they could be reintegrated. We isolate them, stigmatize them, and don't allow them to be at home in homely atmosphere. Rather, they run away and re-traffic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manavendra. He put it in a larger frame. One of the things that I think has to run through our thinking in this session is the role of fear and the role of the role and the importance of reassurance. What do we fear when we get displaced in these types of unsettled, hostile situations? Either we are caught in the crossfire or we are on this side or that side of a tense atmosphere. And this goes all the way from large numbers to each individual who is affected. I think we need to keep that a little bit in our minds, because the coming back, first of all, the displacement and then the coming back, these are very difficult things. And I think each of these situations we've talked about has got an individual crisis and a group crisis. And sometimes you get labeled as being the other, somebody who's on the other side of a dispute or somebody who's on the other side of an attitude, and then what happens? Thank you. So let us keep that in our minds as we go on. I would like to call on Jean-Françoise from Indonesia to make her presentation. You may have 12 real minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Ismail, Miss Dimang Sharon, dear fellow presenter, my Kolkata friend, Mr. Abhishek, and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jean-François. I'm coming from beautiful country, Indonesia. And now I present about Indonesian migrant workers, especially in Saudi Arabia and in Malaysia, who are now still being mistreated and misused. And we call this human trafficking also. Even though this is not armed conflict, but based on my knowledge, because peace and conflict is my degree, is non-armed conflict is more dangerous and worse than real armed conflict. Because in armed conflict, after winning, you can know which one the winner, which one the loser. But in non-armed conflict, many things that we cannot resolve easily, for example, unemployment, poverty, and this human trafficking. Next, please. So before, I use many abbreviations. Before, sir, yes, TKA is Tenaga Kerja Indonesia, in English, Indonesian Migrant Workers, and TKW is Women Indonesian Workers, Tenaga Kerja Wanita. So in Indonesia, we use these two terminology. Next, please. So before I write this as an hypothesis about they are being mistreated, but now it's not hypothesis anymore. This is a real fact that this TKA and TKW, Indonesian migrant workers, who are now being mistreated and misused in Middle Eastern countries and ASEAN countries, especially in Saudi Arabia and Malaysia. And this paper proposed multi-track diplomacy to prevent and to anticipate the misuse of TKA and TKW that have been working in Middle East and ASEAN countries since Indonesia applies 3 laws that we will discuss after, to ratify UN protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, supplementing the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. So those laws show that Indonesia has rule. We have rule. We have government regulation to protect Indonesian migrant workers, TKA and TKW. But in fact, they are still being regarded as a real slave, not a human being. They are being raped, trafficked, beaten, not paid or underpaid, and other worst case in Middle East and Asian countries that absorb many TKA as domestic workers or nurses. And based on the truth spoken in the news and researcher of migrant care, at least there are 13,000 Indonesian migrant workers being raped or being trapped to be prostitute in the year of 2010, and now it's getting bigger. The exact data, but it's getting bigger, about 15,000 people being mistreated. And in the year of 2013, United Nations said that Indonesia is the second largest country with the large number of human trafficking issue. And this issue, TKA and TKW, is the first thing that make this happen. I'm proud to be Indonesian, but for this, I share this real fact to you, dear audience, to know that about this issue. And then next, please. And I use the method of research, qualitative and also quantitative, based on UN protocol, and also in Indonesia we have definition of human trafficking also based on this. Let's skip this to save our time. Next, please. Indonesia has law number 21 year 2007 about eradicating of human trafficking issues. In this law, the definition of human trafficking is all acts of recruit, mobilize, accept, host, send, move, receive of somebody with the threat of harms, violence, kidnapping, fraud, abuse of power that gives other party to own that person inside or outside country in the purpose of exploitation or makes somebody being exploited. Next, please. So we move at the background. Like I said before, there are in 2010, 13,000, and now it's 15,000 or more about TKA and TKW Indonesian migrant workers being mistreated. And this based on the migrant care data, there are almost 90,000 cases of Indonesian migrant workers such as killed, deported, jailed under death law, penalty, violated, underpaid, missing, and tortured. And the countries, based on the migrant care, the countries that do this is Saudi Arabia and Malaysia. And unfortunately, these 2 countries is like favorite countries for migrant workers to go there. Why? Why? Because they give much money, it's more and allowance to migrant workers, but other side they do this to our migrant workers. Next, please. So we move to the analysis. Let me try to summarize this. So we have unemployment rate, and this unemployment rate is not considered as a good labor. We call it fragile work. So Indonesian have they work, but fragile works, not like permanent works. And based on data of OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference, there are still 1.4 billion people, either female or male, in some specific areas, including South Asia, India, Bangladesh, and becoming fragile workers. And this includes also Indonesian migrant workers. And this working poverty is reducing, but in Africa and Asia, the people is still poor even though they are working. So, for example, these Indonesian migrant workers, TKA and TKW, even though they are working, they have a good wage in Malaysia and in Saudi Arabia, but they're still poor. And many taxes, their wages, and also when they are coming back, they are being they're being mistreated by government officials, also by immigration office to give some money. If they're not giving the money, they will give you a guarantee or any such protection to come back to Indonesia. So they are in the middle, trapped in the middle. In some countries they are being mistreated, human traffic, but when they're coming back to Indonesia, to my country, they are also mistreated by government officials. So they are really in the middle, and that's why I'm telling you here to share this idea, to be an opener to you that this is still happens today. Next, please. Yeah, I give you such data about where Indonesia overseas workers went in 2013. The most favorite country is Malaysia because it's closer. And then they gave approximately 6 or 7 million per month to Indonesian migrant workers. I mean 6 million rupiah for USD or euro, maybe 600 euro or 600 US dollar per month to Indonesian migrant workers. And the second Taiwan, and third is Saudi Arabia. And next, please. And this is our minister. This Mr. Hanif Dakri on the left side of me. That saying is in Indonesia, but he said that his mother was Indonesian migrant workers, so he know the problem of their facing of and then how they are being mistreated, how they are being human trafficked, and this just about Indonesia migrant workers give 140 trillion rupiah. It approximately 14 million US dollar for government tax to Indonesia. So they are like hero to us, but they are mistreated. So this is like some kind of dilemma, yeah, non-armed conflict. But it's such a conflict, okay? It's such a conflict also. Next, please, sir. And this an image of Indonesian migrant workers with this, what is, yeah. And then about until 2006 until 2014, about 5 million people give that kind of money, taxes to the government, but they are still mistreated. It's based on Indonesia NGO data. And next, please, sir. And also, I download this from the OEM, yeah. Miss Diman Sharon will know about this. Yes, about the graphic of domestic workers. And next, please. It's also from EOM. And next, please. Okay, so I summarize on conclusion. Okay, what is being irony? It's that Saudi Arabia also member of some intergovernmental organization that Indonesia also participate in. For example, Organization of Islamic Conference, but they do not implement the human rights for Indonesian migrant workers. Instead of being self-critical, they are only passive participant to solve the highest rate of Indonesian migrant workers being tortured physically and mentally. We conclude that Indonesia government has lack of political will to stop these misuse of Indonesian migrant workers that are being trapped, excess sexual desire of their patron. Even the government officials are part of this benefit. In short term solution, we recommend that the Indonesia government to strengthen BPN to TKA is like organization body under government to protect and to give training for Indonesia migrant workers before going to other countries. And then in the middle term solution, we urge Indonesian government together with ASEAN countries, especially, I don't know if there is a lady in Myanmar here, to hold serious meeting about the misuse of Indonesian migrant workers. And in the long-term solution, we think that the high diplomacy is need to change the mentality about other countries to see Indonesia. Indonesia is not like a country of domestic workers or country of slave, but we are a country of like in the legal situation. We are a country of rich culture. We are a country of developing economy. We have good tourism and other things better than to be regarded as a country of giving domestic worker. And this is the core of this paper is that intergovernment cooperation is needed to prevent this. First is coming from education. Indonesia young people has to have a good education so they can be independent from their family at the age of 21. If they are going abroad to work or to study, it means that there must be under professional contract. And until now, there are still illegal agencies who give this bad opportunity for Indonesian migrant workers to work to other countries. And there is no protection after. There is no guarantee after. And monitoring from government, for example, intelligence body is also needed to see which party is doing fraud in the name of sending migrant workers or illegal agencies. And sometimes government is in cooperation to do that, so the report must be renewal each year. Last is about creating a good economy for Indonesia itself, how to reduce poverty, and also how to stimulate middle income people to be entrepreneur. We hope that this paper could be an eye-opener that Indonesia migrant workers are being misused, and please be aware that it's for your country too, because international crime are somehow connected each other. And in the straightforward is that we want Saudi Arabia and Malaysia government to respect Indonesia migrant workers under professional contract. And I'm coming from Indonesia Defense University, and we do not many things, but we do small things with Indonesia migrant workers. Each semester with the students, we go to the poor areas, we work with them for the community development, and also we work with the children of this TK and TKW workers. Why? Because they are being bullied, they are being discriminated by the society. For example, if you are a children or child of Indonesian migrant workers, society will tell you, your mother is a whore, your mother is a prostitute, something like that. So university must reach this society more real and more realistic way. I hope I do just small things to present this paper, but I hope this is such an eye-opener, and I believe in this room there are many great people, especially Ms. Diman Sharun from International Migration Organization, and let's collaborate to prevent this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jean-François. So now we have, in a way, two scenarios. There's an economic scenario, and there's a conflict scenario. And there's competition and antagonism implicit in both of them. So what are we looking at? We're looking at a conscious movement in both those scenarios. And we're looking at a pressurized movement in both those scenarios. Because if there is simply no work, or you are considered unemployable, or you have no basic base to sustain yourself, then you have to move, or you have to give up. People move. If there is an antagonism as part of it, for whatever reason, and I think a spectrum of reasons has been put before us, then we are looking at identity problems. We're looking at an assigned identity and your self-identity. Who do you think you are? And who are you treated as being? And you're getting a lot of that across the world now. That if you're of a certain type, color, origin, faith, you're the wrong identity. And therefore, whatever possibilities there might be, economic or social, are going to be barred to you. And you have to fight against a different wall than what you thought. So, we move now to our final presenters, Anushka Thompson and Gaurav Kumar Tomar, Chaitanalia. It's yours. Whoops. Let me take my papers.
Good morning, one and all. I'm Anushka Thompson. and my colleague, Mr. Gaurav Kumar Tomar. We are from Chetanale, Delhi, and our organization has been working for the rights of domestic workers and prevention of human trafficking. So, at this point of time, we are basically presenting and discussing will be on the unsafe migration and the aspect of trafficking that is prevalent among domestic workers, very specifically. And as we see that, can we have the presentation? So we've been looking at this trafficking aspect of trafficking in many other areas, but something that is invisible, that is hidden, we feel, is the trafficking that is taking in huge numbers for domestic workers or for domestic work. So according to the census, we find that after the sex trade, the trafficking that is taking place for domestic work is on high. And there have been no data that exists till today, exact data that exists till today on the number of domestic workers that are there in the country. But a very rough data, according to Draft National Policy on Domestic Workers, very recently said that it is somewhere around 6 to 10 million across the country. And we see that this form of labor trafficking is highly there, and because of its nature, it is found to be it is this workforce, this kind of trafficking is found to be invisible and hidden. And many a times what we've seen is this is majorly covered under the covered under migration. Many a times it is majorly understood as migration and not trafficking. Now when we next slide, when we go to the factors that are leading, we all know what could be the push and the pull factors. So one of the point here I want to discuss is the pull factor. That when such girls are trafficked, when these girls are brought to the metropolitan city, or for example to Delhi, cities like Delhi, what happens is the kind of situation that is portrayed in front of them is a rosy picture, which basically attracts them to come to this place. Very few years back, if I can remember, few years back, we visited Chhattisgarh, and we were talking to one of the rescued victims by an organization, local organization, Chhattisgarh. And when we were talking to her, we asked her, like, what was the reason you wanted to come to Delhi and work? So she expressed that she came with one of her friend who was already working in Delhi earlier and had gone back to her home, and she expressed that she saw bathing soap wrapper with the friend. So just to just attractive this thing of she wanted to use that soap, and she knew that the soap is she can buy it from Delhi, and she wanted to use and have a experience of such a lifestyle. Was that what brought her to Delhi? So the point here is such tiny things kind of attract, and the demand and the situation that is portrayed in front of these girls and women is something presented very attractively. Now, next slide. Now we see here is a state-wise representation of domestic workers, from which majorly we see is from Jharkhand. Now this chart is from the basically this sharing is from our experience of Chetanale's experience of working with the domestic workers and with the workers we have with our forum, around 3,200 workers. This is the kind of representation from different states that we have. So the highest being from from Jharkhand, and then from Chhattisgarh. We see that majorly girls are being trafficked from these states. Next. Also, in the past few years, we've been into rescue, and the cases we've received from 2014 to 17, out of which we find that 63% of the cases had the elements of trafficking. Now, although these cases were when we speak to the rescued victims, when we go and speak to them, we find that in many cases even these people are not aware of that they are being trafficked, or even the family members are not being aware of being trafficked. So after talking to them and probing into the cases and further investigation, we find that these are portrayed as voluntary migration, but are in actual the cases of trafficking for domestic work. Next. Now, a domestic work situation and a migration situation becomes trafficking whenever there's a use of force, fraud, and coercion in the situation. So we see that next slide. We see that the how force is used with regard to domestic workers. If we see that they're confined, they're restricted, their movement is restricted, they're confined to the houses, the four walls of the house, they are isolated, kept isolated. And with regard to this, the one of the case that we received to in our organization was that we received a case of a girl from Jharkhand who was a minor, and she had worked in Haryana and Delhi. Now she was since years she was not being allowed. She was isolated from others. She was not even paid anything for her this thing. Later, when we had probed into the case and when we rescued her, we also came to know that she was raped by the placement agents, and not one, probably there were 2-3 people who raped her. So next slide. Next. So there have been situations where fraud have been used, like non-payment is one of the very major component of this. We've been receiving so many cases all these years, and what we found is non-payment is something that is very common, and so for something that is very again very backward when it comes with regard to government, when it comes with regard to law to do anything for the payment issue. Then the next slide. The third being the coercion part of it. So all these situations become dangerous, becomes trafficking when force, fraud, and coercion is used. And then we see next slide. We see here also women and children as targets. They're vulnerable due to the cheap, because there's this cheap labor. There's high gender discrimination. They're highly vulnerable to this. Delhi being the most attractive destination along with the other metropolitan cities, and there's this huge network of traffickers that is going along in this trafficking for domestic work, very specially. That every point of time, it's a very organized crime, and at every point of time you find a new person, a new face to handle you. From one point to another, there's so much of exchange of hands that's happening in this whole process of trafficking. Next. This is something that the organization have, that the cases that we received, we've found that majorly they were female, sorry, and the major cases were of below 18. Next. The major thing that we found is that placement agents as traffickers. Now, in the cases that we've received, and our experience speaks that in many of the cases it is a relative or a known person who asks this victims, or who's a person who's bringing them to Delhi in a dangerous situation. In majority of cases, they are unaware of the scenario that they land up in, because many a times we found that they were told they were not told what exactly was the situation, and they found themselves there are a lot of harassment along with that's happening with these people. Now, to make a small analysis of the experience that the organization that we had with regard to this, there's a small exploratory study that was done, which will be shared by my colleague, Mr. Gaurav.
Thank you, Anusika. Yeah, good afternoon to everybody. I'll just continue this PPT forward, and I'll tell about me later this PPT. So Chetnale Domestic Workers Forum is working since last 15 years for the rights of domestic workers, as well as for the prevention of human trafficking. And during these 4 phases, right now we are in the 4th phase, working for the protection of the children's working for the rights of domestic worker as well as for the prevention of human trafficking. In the last fourth phase, we have received 158 cases. Out of these 158 cases, we have rescued 98 trafficking victims. Those have been trafficking in the various mode by the traffickers, and we have established a system in the Chetnale Domestic Workers Forum where the calls and complaints comes and we react to them. And then after we rescue the victim and try to rehabilitate them. So just to present here, we have conducted a small study to tell about the issues. Can you forward please? How the things are happening actually. Just please go on next question. Yeah. Yeah. We just prepared a question and we asked the domestic workers, those who are working part-time and full-time, we try to know what is exactly happening between them. We ask, who brought you Delhi? What was the person, male or female, known to you or unknown? We just simply asked through the question here. Then we received the answer. The 41% domestic workers, those are working as a part-time or full-time domestic worker, were brought by male, and rest of 59 were brought by the female. That was the answer of them. And the rest of the things was very vulnerable thing is the 72% domestic worker who said that they were brought to Delhi, they were brought by the known persons. And rest of the said by the unknown person. It reflects that when we speak about the exploitation happening with the domestic worker, especially in the context of human trafficking, it is very, the things which is really reflect in a very bad manner that the known persons are only doing their exploitation, not outsiders and others. Others are in very less quantity. Their known and relatives are only involved in their exploitation. This is the thing. Then, so second question we had asked, how did agent and trafficker approach you and your family, whether they directly contacted you or through somebody? Then there was answer, the 38% domestic workers or trafficked victims were brought by the only one agent. Who are these 38 persons? Our study says that these are those persons, the traffickers, who were earlier working as a domestic worker or who were working earlier as a middle person. Later on, they have become directly agent or direct trafficker. That is 38%. Rest of the 62% said that they were brought by the known persons, by their relatives, by their classmates, by their colleagues and all. They were brought by these peoples, and some agent was handling entire things. One of the agent is there standing or sitting in Delhi somewhere in a agency. He is handling everything, and these people are being taken by the. Question number 3 is, were you aware of being brought to Delhi? Yes, 59% people said that they were aware that they are going Delhi, but they were not aware what is going to happen with them, because there were false promises made with them. That was told to these people that you will get some good salary there, you will study there, you will enjoy Delhi environment, you will watch movies, and all the such false promises were made with them. And later on, situation was very different. Due to very less time, I'm not going through the story. Otherwise, every question have a story behind. So one story I'll tell you here. One girl was there from Odisha. She was committed that she will be married with this boy, and then later on they will start their new life together, and this boy will earn money and he will get enjoyed this girl in Delhi, and he will show her so many places and all. She believed in this boy, and then she came with this boy to Delhi. Later on, this boy sold her to her family within 50,000 rupees through some agents. And then later on, this boy switched off his phone, and the phone which was given to this girl was also taken by the employer and was broken. After 1 year, somehow she contacted her brother, and her brother contacted us in Delhi. Then we rescued the victim. Then later on, we came to know, then the time we went to rescue, the employer was not there. Employer's son is working in Navy in Mumbai, so he has gone there for 15 days. And for 15 days, she was kept locked from outside in this home only. She was crying that time we reached, and we rescue her. The next question, number 4, was, did you kind of exploit? Did you face any kind of exploitation and abuse during the journey, or after the journey you finished and you was employed with somebody's house? 15% said yes. This is very less number because people doesn't want to express what exactly they have gone through. Very less people only come and say. it shows 15%, and rest of the 85% said they have not gone through any exploitation, which really doesn't reflect that is true. But according to our experience, as we have rescued many rescue operations in Delhi, so we can say that 85% people are being exploited and rest 15% are not being exploited. That may be in that form, but this is the questionnaire which we had among the domestic workers. Next question was there any contract with employer? Only 12% said yes, 88% said no. These 12% also we had tried to go through that what 12% are saying, because there is no policy of contract in Delhi especially. There is no contract. If contract is there, contract is in between employer and agent, not in between victim, the worker or victim, or in between the employer. That is not there. So 12% said that also was not very satisfactory. But as per our experience, when we asked the question, that was the answer of them. Next question was, did you get your promised salary? That is never being happen, never is taking place in Delhi with the domestic workers. The worker which are being trafficked from the source state to destination state like Delhi, they are promised for good salary, for good environment, for the 8 hours duty only, but rest of the things are not taking place. Even the salary promised 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 is also not being given to them. Later on, what we have been doing, this is a different question, but I'll just give few suggestions very soon. Suggestions are that we are supposed to hit the demand. This is our experience. We are supposed to hit the demand. We should work in the state like Delhi and the other Mumbai, other cities. We can hit the demand in collaboration with the NGOs, with the government department, because all of us are aware, including all government agencies, where the sex trade is going on, where the domestic workers are working, where the child labor is going on. We are well aware about this. If people really want to eradicate, we want to really reduce the number of the trafficking victims, so we can easily do that. And the next is strong law for the placement agency. In Delhi, we people are working, and it seems that as soon as possible, some law is going to the thing where is no law for the placement agency. More than 10,000 placement agencies are working in Delhi itself. They are deploying domestic workers, and there is no law for them. Conviction rate is very low. We have to increase the conviction rate actually. When the trafficker will not be convicted, the number of the trafficking victim will be increasing simultaneously. So we have to work on that. One more point is awareness on community level. Awareness is also not enough to curb this issue. That is very important. We should aware the community where from the domestic workers are coming. There is one example. After the awareness, there was one magistrate session judge in Delhi. He has employed a domestic worker. Then she was 10-year-old only. He was well aware about the law. And 10 years he was doing her exploitation without salary, without sending her back and everything. So rehabilitation of the victim, rehabilitation is one of the very important component. The other presenters also spoke about it. That is very important. If rehabilitation is not taking place, then trafficking of the victim can take place. Even we have seen in Jharkhand, many of the trafficked victim has spoken that we really don't want to be here because you did anything good with us. We were at least having good food. We are not happy here because there is no rehabilitation policy. Thank you.
Sorry to make you sorry, but you've got two presentations. This is what happens when you have twins. Thank you very much to all the presenters. We have got very limited time, so I won't do summing up just now. I think you've got your questions ready. And if you would like to start with that, and try to keep your questions as short and pointed as you can so that we have time for interaction with the panelists. So do I see any hands up for questions? There's one there, yes? One there, 2, 3. Okay, somebody keeping track? 1, 2, 3. Is there a mic? You were not one, were you? One was here.
Even I was one.
I know even you did, but you are now second.
Okay.
Good. Good morning. My question to the panel is related to the conflict situation. How the panel would like to see the situation of kidnapping of 276 schoolgirls by Boko Haram, where the newspaper report suggested that Boko Haram was hoping to use the girls as a negotiating pawns in exchange of some of their commanders in jail. So how the panel will see this situation as far as conflict situation is concerned?
But was that really to do with migration? Okay, we take your question. All right, now, madam, I'll give you that. Say who you are.
My name is Rohini
Yeah.
Nicholas, and I am representing Child in Need Institute. My question to the panelists is in terms of migration. Like, everybody spoke that migration is a right for all, and everybody spoke about, like, the panelists spoke very well about how like to help migrants. But I in all the presentation, one thing that I found missing was like on the prevention aspect. How can we stop migration? How can we help stop migration? Because migration, I think, is related more like, you know, as in terms of like ma'am also spelled out economic scenario, looking into the economic scenario. So how do we help them, like, you know, to stop in our country also we see a lot of migration happening in states, like in Delhi, lot of, like, in the presentation we saw, but we didn't look into the aspect of how can we help them not migrate. So my question to the panelists is how.
All right. All right.
How can we stop?
No, I think he's raising the point between the right to migrate and the need for job security, income security, and other security in your own place. Because there's a displacement also that is taking place. Is that what you meant? Okay, now please, we've got let's come in sequence, huh? Don't just keep taking the mic from each other. We've got people who had already raised their hand. You'll get your turn, huh?
Ma'am, you clearly pointed out in one of your slides the distinction between human trafficking and people smuggling. There is a clear distinction between the two. I'd love for you to be able to spell out a little bit more. One. Two is, in terms of international organizations and addressing the issue of human trafficking. Across Europe, for instance, yesterday one of our panelists spoke about how while this is definitely an issue that goes across countries, even in Europe, countries themselves perceive this as a national issue and not so much international. So how does one therefore overcome prejudices that exist in countries in your vast experience? To a third question to ma'am, you from Bangla Natak. And this is in respect of your experience moving across and using art as a form of reaching out through. You spoke about evidence-based advocacy. Perhaps have you ever tried using casework itself, which brings evidence into the fore using courtrooms and so on? That would be terrific.
Okay. Now, who had the hands up? We'll take you in sequence. You did. And then you. Your turn will come. Life is not over.
Hello, my name is Victor Chakrabarti. I am a volunteer for Hamari Muskan. And my question to all the panelists is this, that many times we see that the people who are meant to protect us, they are often the ones who are doing the crimes like human trafficking. How do we tackle that situation?
Okay. Yes? Mike?
सबों को जोहार, मेरा नाम पूजा है, मैं झारखंड से आई हूँ, झारखंड एंटी ट्रैफिकिंग नेटवर्क के साथ काम करती हूँ। मैं बहुत एग्री करती हूँ अनन्या दी और चेतनालय के प्रेजेंटेशन से, पर दो तीन चीज़ें मेरे को और भी कहनी है, जैसे कि झारखंड जैसे राज्य में हम स्टॉप माइग्रेशन का जो एक अप्रोच है वो बहुत स्ट्रांग है, तो वहाँ पे सेफ माइग्रेशन की बात करना थोड़ा चैलेंजिंग होता है, और जहाँ पे हम जैसे एनजीओज और गवर्नमेंट दोनों ही स्टॉप माइग्रेशन को लेके बात करती है, अलग अलग बैठकों में कहती है कि आप 2 रोटी कम खाओ पर बाहर काम करने नहीं जाओ, तो यही कहाँ पे हम राइट टू मोबिलिटी को एड्रेस कर रहे हैं, ये एक चिंता की बात थी। और दूसरा था कि हम ऐसे डिस्कशंस में या अलग अलग मीडिया में भी हमेशा हम वो चीज़ कवर करते हैं जो अनसेफ माइग्रेशन का स्टोरी होता है, या फिर जो माइग्रेशन को थोड़ा डरावना शो करता है, ट्रैफिकिंग की स्टोरी ज़्यादा शो करता है। इसके बजाय हम कुछ सक्सेस स्टोरीज भी, वी हैव लॉट्स ऑफ सक्सेस स्टोरी, अगर हम उन सक्सेस स्टोरीज के ऊपर भी जो बात करें हम, तो फिर कहीं ना कहीं हम दोनों के बीच, क्योंकि वही कम्युनिटी है जहां से एक स्टोरी सक्सेस हो रहा है, एक स्टोरी ट्रैफिकिंग में बदल रहा है, तो वो कंपेयर और वो फिर कम्युनिटी तक वो इन्फॉर्मेशन जाने में कहीं ना कहीं सहूलियत होती है कि हर माइग्रेशन जो है वो ट्रैफिकिंग में कन्वर्ट नहीं होता है, बशर्ते कि कुछ चीज़ों का अगर हम पालन करें तो।
All right, thank you.
Good morning,
Haji,
everyone.
who else? Yes.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My question is to all the panelists that sometimes even superstition leads a person to migrate from one place to another. For example, if something is not going well with you, you go to a certain person or babas, and then they will tell you to go to this place, and then everything will be all right. And in that process, you get trafficked. So how do you tackle this when the question of faith arises?
Anyone else? Yeah, second row. Yes.
Myself, Dilip from Child in Need Institute. Actually, we have received several children who are migrated from Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and sometimes we are facing problem to rehabilitate of the children. So what should be the rehabilitation process by the government, if the panelists say it about it?
Okay.
Where are you? Hi, I am Abhishek from Rupantran. My question is, while we talk about migration, we often neglect the migration of women in the name of marriage, whether it is safe or unsafe, because this is a very gray area. We don't talk much about things which is considered so-called private in public. That was one. Secondly, with girls, the cases of child marriage, because it opens a plethora of, I'll say, human rights violation, like, and vulnerability, be it trafficking, be it domestic violence, right to education, livelihood, and our dignity is compromised.
Okay, thank you. Now we have 7, 8 questions. Anyone else? Not immediately. Who would like to answer what? I am not going to give you time. Wait a minute. Yeah. Anybody? Huh? Okay. You and then welcome. Are willing to answer. Yes, ma'am.
Those addressed to me and then presenting them. Yeah, thank you very much. Again, quickly, I'll start with the questions which are addressed to me directly. Sorry, I didn't go into details to define trafficking and smuggling in the interest of time, but of course I take note of that. Briefly looking at human trafficking, we have 3 main elements: the act, the means, and the purpose. The act, which refers to moving one person from one place to another, and the means, how do you actually use it? How do you move this person? Could be through fraud, could be influencing them, undue influence, deceptions, and definitely for the purpose of exploitation. You have the intent to exploit them. But for children, you need to just have the act and the purpose, but the means, because they're children, they cannot make a decision. So that's, in summary, that's what human trafficking means. Whereas smuggling is the procurement of a service, where this person, I'll come to you and say, can you please help me to cross this border? I would like to move, let's say, from India to Bangladesh, and how do you help me to move? So in smuggling, I come, as a migrant, I'll come to you, and you are a service provider. Human trafficking ideally happens internally as well as externally across the border, whereas smuggling, it has to be across the border. So that's briefly in terms of the definition. Then you asked the question of why international organizations should actually be involved looking at human trafficking issues. Why is it an issue for them? Why shouldn't it be a national issue? Well, In my recommendations I focused mainly, I looked at the state's recommendations as well as the recommendations for the international community. And this main reason is, when you look at human trafficking, it is all smuggling for that matter. It's carried out in a clandestine manner. It's not open. It is something which is hidden. Whereas we need state capacity to be able to respond to human trafficking, at the same time, we need the international actors to actually come into the play. I can give an example, say, of Myanmar. In northern Myanmar, Kachin, northern Shan, there are some non-government controlled areas where I would say the independent, those armed groups are very active and government doesn't have access there. But what we did was mainly to engage everybody, the CSOs who actually have access in those non-government control areas, to be able to respond, to provide a support to the victims. And while we are bringing together government, non-government actors to understand the needs of these people, they realized actually there is a service provider there and we can capitalize on that, on their access to those areas. Somehow we formed a bridge between government and the non-government actors, and in a way we're able to respond. But beyond that, sometimes there are limited resources, especially during emergencies. You cannot respond to all the needs of the people. But when the international community looks at trafficking or addressing the needs of vulnerable migrants in crisis, then they will prioritize, because it all depends on funding. How are you able to respond? Sometimes you realize there is a need, but if you don't have the sufficient resources, it's a bit challenging. And we look at the international, the IASC, sometimes we have those cluster systems. We have protection, which looks at child protection, gender-based violence, but there's nothing which is focused on trafficking, on vulnerable migrants. So if we prioritize that and we have a clear cluster on trafficking, definitely when they go up there to look for resources, they will think this is a priority, let's give funding to that area. So it should be both government as well as non-government. But I think it's also very important to come from up, because normally when there's pressure from the international community, somehow government respond. So that's why I think we need to strike a balance, but at the same time, there is need for support from the international community to realize and appreciate a problem indeed as one. Because if they don't, then government in most cases, they lie back and they don't take action. That's why I think we need more pressure or more support or more appreciation by the international community. One of the congregation, you were asking about prevention. Like I started with migration. What is migration? Migration is part of us, part of human history. There is no way you are going to stop migration. It is just like water flowing. It's irresistible. I don't know if you look at people here, how many actually come from Kolkata? How many are Indians here? Put up your hands. Yes, and of all these Indians, how many are born here? Yeah, and you are living here. Yeah, so even in our own we are moving. I come from Uganda. I was working in Myanmar, but based now in Bangladesh. So it's part of us. We cannot stop it. But while we can't stop migration, how do we make sure that it is safe? How do we make sure that people can actually benefit from it? For me, when I look at the safety of migration, I do not just focus on the legality of the safety. Sometimes we tend to focus more on how legal is migration or how regular is migration. And we think if I have a passport, if I have a visa, and then I'm moving, I'm safe. No, we should make migration more, the safety should include the legality of it, but at the same time, making it gainful. So when we prepare people, looking at how they can benefit from migration, looking at how they can move in a safe way, and while they are in those destination countries, how they can actually exercise their rights, how they can benefit from their migration, how they plan and go back home and benefit from their time while abroad, I look at that as a safe migration. And in the long run, when you make this migration safe, then you can benefit from it. But on the other hand, there are many factors, economic factors. People move because of livelihood. There are those who are actually pushed, who are forced. They don't have any other option. So what can we do back home to make sure that people can make better choices? Migration shouldn't just be an option for my survival. I can look at other alternatives back home if I don't want to migrate anyway. So we don't stop migration, but we give people, like you give them a choice. You say, this is what it is. You can choose to do this, have your livelihood, stay back home, because home is always the best anyway. And then, but when you choose to go, how are you going and how safe are you? So for me, it's not about preventing migration, but it's about facilitating migration and making it safe. The other point, somebody talked about, I think corruption. Yes, it's a big issue. During conflict, there are so many, well, even both government, non-government, even the corruption. By the way, let's not just focus about government. Even the humanitarian actors themselves, some of them are corrupt. When you're providing support, you think, yes, I am providing support, I am in that position, and I can take advantage of it. Sadly, this is happening. So while we are doing this, let us look at, we stop being human beings, but we should be human, I think. So the corruption, let's not just see, how am I benefiting as a human being? We are out there to serve people. Can we actually do the job that we're supposed to be doing? Not just looking at, okay, how am I benefiting as an individual? So I see corruption, it's one of those fueling factors. And especially during emergencies, during conflict, this is happening. So it is the time for me, the time for you to wake up and be able to respond and utilize the authority we have been given, the resources we have been given to provide support those who actually need it. Thank you very much.
You want the mic here?
Hello.
I'll answer the question on casework. If you had noticed, I'd put it in the first line of my presentation. I didn't read through them. But when I was talking of capacity building of CSOs, there's a first requirement, because that is where we can build evidence, and the other is, partnership with academics and universities. So you're absolutely right. Now, regarding the question on what has to be done when there are no jobs. Now, certain things which we are trying, and I'll just share those, not only we, many organizations are trying. One is, why are these areas so backward? Because the businesses don't find it of interest, so there's no service. Now here, social entrepreneurship can play a significant role. So if government enables a system of supporting social entrepreneurship, youth entrepreneurship, women entrepreneurship, these three things we have found how they're working. Impulse, as some of you may be aware, they addressed human trafficking through setting up of weaver networks, and they're now supplying to New York, but the women are at their home and they're supplying. So these kinds of models are there, and these need to be scaled up and promoted. The question about what to do to the children, the most vulnerable group, right in the beginning, we were asked to talk of age group, and the most vulnerable age group is the adolescents, the youth, the young girls, and the boys, because today, sadly, in India, 60% are still dropping out of school at the age of 14 years. Now, for them, we need to create space, and this could be virtual, could be real, has to be both actually, but our adolescents need space to discuss, to dialogue, because there's no communication with parents, no communication with teachers, and they're all getting, access to this bad world through internet. So we need to create adolescent spaces. And the other question about livelihood, other than social entrepreneurship, if we have ecosystems to support care economy, it's a huge sector internationally. And, just by having laws and procedures in place, we can, tweak the situation of domestic work into a vibrant care economy. Similarly, if you look into our own resources, our natural resources, our cultural resources, our traditional skills, and build local enterprise, that creates resilience, which I had shared also a few examples. Regarding the case of kidnapping, kidnapping is a crime, and they kind of abused. So it is an exploitation. So and regarding addressing corruption, we need to have more of these two-way communications so that you get to know the situation on ground. Often we use interactive theater where, we ask people what if situation, we ask them to interact and these stories come out. All the stories I told today were stories we got from the field. So we need to create those to understand the local perspective. And that's my take on, again, it's an issue of having information, sharing information, and building evidence. Thank you.
Sorry, I wanted to answer on marriage migration. Somebody asked a question on marriage migration. Yeah, well, I did not, in the interest of time, I did not go into details to finish my entire presentation, but I had something on marriage migration. And specifically, I'll refer to what is happening increasingly in, again, sorry, I refer to Myanmar so much. In Kachin, Northern Shan, Northern Myanmar mainly, we have the problem of marriage migration, where young girls actually cross over to China for marriage purposes. And this is mainly those who are being displaced because majority actually living in IDP camps because of the conflict which is going on in northern Myanmar. And again, we find that very young girls get married not because actually they choose, but because they don't have any other livelihood opportunities back home. And even their parents actually push them to go and get married. First of all, for security, to get out of the conflict area, but at the same time as a means of survival. And sadly, while they're in China, they also get abused. They give birth to children and then push from one home to another, contractual marriages, and which is actually very, very challenging. And what has been happening in terms of interventions, we have tried to bring together all the government to sit and discuss and see how they can respond to the issue of marriage migration. Because when these women go across to China and get married, they are not recognized as regular migrants. They are not, even when they're actually in their homes, so-called marriage, they can't be given the regular status in those countries. The police will come up, round them up, and have them arrested, even when they're actually victims of trafficking. So discussions are ongoing, trying to see how to address the challenge. The first step was to have a standard operating procedures on how to provide support to such kind of vulnerable migrants. And now they're trying to discuss to see how they can actually have these SOPs finalized and perhaps have a legal framework and consider marriage migration visas. So this is being planned and hopefully something positive will come out of these efforts. Thank you.
Okay, there are certain questions that have not been addressed, and I certainly don't have the answers. But let us flag them because they are questions that need to be looked at more. Because you asked 8 questions altogether, and I think one of the things that did come up as a second question was how can we help to stop migration? And I think that's been discussed pro and con. That's been discussed pro and con. But the thing is, migration that is willing and intentional and positive minded is a different thing to migration which is pushed away. That is the distinction that has come up in this morning's discussion, and I think we need to be mindful of that. Not everyone leaves because they want to. An important point was made in one of the questions that what is the base resource in the place from which people move away, and does it have any positive holding potential? Does it have any positive holding value? Are there jobs available at home? No. Are there other options for income generation available at home? Yes or no? Those are the questions. We did not get into that in the presentations very much, but it's something for us to think about. Because that is often the case, that there is nothing at home, and therefore you go. Even your stepping stones may be of that kind. There's no school at home, so you go. There's no training possibility at home, so you go. The point that perhaps we need to keep in mind, and which perhaps did not come up that much, even though it was there by inference and implication throughout the presentations, was the question of inclusion and what qualifies us to be included, for good and for bad. What qualifies us to be pushed out? What qualifies us to be respected and retained where we wish to be? The identity factor is increasingly a factor across the world, not just in our part of the world, but it is increasingly a factor. That there is a push element in who you are. And if you go hopefully, remember yesterday's story, Chandra's story, how hopefully and innocently and naively she went. And then got exploited by somebody from our own part of the world. I asked her who the trafficker was, and she said it was a Malaysian who was part of a gang. So those are things that need more analysis. One of the big gaps is lack of research and analysis, lack of investigation, lack of study. We learned a lot today about other parts of the world. It's important that we should be seekers of that kind of information, because some of the questions and answers are circulating and are being addressed in other parts of the world, and we should learn from it. The interconnectedness of causes and effects is something that has also been flagged. I was a little biased coming in this morning because I was sitting in the climate change discussion yesterday, and a lot of that was still circulating. All of you were in something yesterday. Not all were in the climate change panel. All of you were in some panel yesterday. What did you connect from there to here today? There may have been an insight there that applies here. In the afternoon, we have some more panels. I think we need to invest in making those connections, at least in our own minds. But I think the invitation to us in this conference as a whole is to become messengers. If we have acquired something to communicate or something to question further, please let us commit ourselves to give some of our time to being communicators ourselves. Even if we're communicating the questions and the doubts, let us communicate. Because that is the value of a conference of this kind. I met this woman for the first time, and I may not see her again. But if I lose the connection, at least 50% is my fault. The other 50% would be her fault. So let us do that. Is there a mailing list that we can ask from here? And can we get onto a follow-on thinking? We're taking away possibly more questions than answers. But it's a very good thing to go away with questions to examine. So let us think of that. Now, again, just to connect the two threads that came up in today's presentations, was the economic factor, the employment factor, and I think a couple of the presentations shared that the people who are involved or who get moved or who actually go themselves seeking a different setting for employment outnumber the ones who are victims of sexual exploitation. The ones who go looking for employment also get trapped in sexual exploitation quite often. But the motive of the trafficker, as well as the person who gets trafficked, is more often economic and employment generated. You don't have employment possibilities where you are. So your motivation to move is also there. Your motivation to do better. Small children are sent away to work so that the other children at home can be fed. There are laws in most of our countries against child labor. They are flouted. There are practices and occupations which should not involve children at all. And I think, though it was fleetingly mentioned, we haven't talked about what is happening as a result of the cyber revolution. There is a whole lot of messaging which is completely misleading. How is it affecting this situation? Is it or is it not? And is there one of the panels which is looking at that kind of issue? So we have run out of our time. For some reason, you were supposed to have lunch early today. And that's why we had less time to start with. So I hope it has been satisfying to you as at least for a positive unsettling. Unsafe migration, armed conflict, displacement, human trafficking. One thing that we didn't perhaps look at, and I leave you with that, is the question of scale. All these are potential emergency situations. But an emergency is an emergency even if it affects one person. It's an emergency for that person. A disaster is a disaster even if it affects one person, even if it affects one family. Therefore, we should not look for things to reach that maximum scale of very visible numbers in order to say that this is a crisis situation. Let's keep that question of scale in mind as well. Thank you very much for being a good, attentive group. Even the back row was very alive, I think. No, because yesterday's group was talking amongst themselves. Today's was not. Not that much. At least I couldn't hear you. I have learned a lot this morning. Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much to the group. Please go and infiltrate the other panels in the afternoon. The next task is infiltration. And I hope that when we meet at tea afterwards, that we will have something to tell each other. You wanted to say something? Hang on. I withdraw my thanks. There's still something.
We will just complete the formalities of this session, and there is still 15 minutes to go before lunch will be served. So to complete the formalities of the session, I will request the chairperson of this session, Ms. Razia Ismail, and I would also like to thank her very much for chairing the session. The chairperson will hand over mementos to the speakers of this session for Ms. Dimansho Sharon.
What shall I give you?
It's coming. This is total Bengal handicraft. For Ms. Ananya Bhattacharya. For Mr. Manobendra Mondol. Ms. Jean-Françoise. Ms. Anushika Thompson. And for Mr. Gaurav Kumar Tomar. I would like to remind you that there is an exhibition on in the Bengal Gallery, which is on the first floor, and where lunch is being served. So we would request all of you to have a look at the exhibition that has been which has been exhibited with a lot of care. And regarding the mailing list, of course, you are in contact with each other. You can take the contacts from each other. But we have a total mailing list with us also. And anything that you require, the Kolkata Maryward Social Center will be ready to help you. Thank you for being a part of this session. And lunch will be served in 15 minutes' time.
But it's just 12 on the program.
I know, but it's a little bit late.